The massive elephant stopped walking. Right there, in the middle of the dusty road, surrounded by 50 tourists holding cameras, she froze. Her enormous head turned slowly, deliberately, toward one woman standing at the back of the crowd. Sarah Mitchell felt her breath catch in her throat. The elephant's amber eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. After 10 years, 10 long years of wondering, hoping, and trying to forget, the giant creature began moving again, but this time not forward. She was walking toward Sarah, each footstep sending small tremors through the ground. The tour guide started shouting warnings. Tourists scattered, but Sarah couldn't move. The elephant's trunk rose into the air and a sound erupted from her chest. Not a trumpet of aggression, something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like recognition, like longing, like a voice calling across a decade of silence. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be captured on 17 different phones, uploaded to social media within the hour, and viewed by 40 million people in 3 days. But for Sarah, the only thing that mattered was standing 15 feet away, massive and magnificent and impossible. Mahla had remembered her. 10 years earlier, Sarah Mitchell had been running from grief. At 32, she'd walked away from her veterinary career in Seattle after losing her younger brother to cancer. The same disease she'd spent her career fighting in animals but couldn't save him from in humans. Her older sister Emma had suggested the volunteer program during a 2 a.m. phone call when Sarah admitted she didn't want to live anymore. "Go somewhere you can't run from yourself," Emma had said. The elephant sanctuary in northern Thailand was 13 time zones and a world away from her pain. Sarah had expected heat and hard work, maybe some distance from the memories that were drowning her. What she got was a 3-month-old elephant calf, orphaned by poachers, who was dying from a broken heart. Sometimes salvation comes wrapped in the very thing you're trying to save. The sanctuary director, Chanida, had placed the trembling infant in Sarah's care with 6 words that changed everything. "She won't survive the night alone." That night stretched into 3 months of round-the-clock feeding, sleeping in the barn, and slowly discovering that healing someone else's trauma can resurrect your own will to live. Sarah named her Mahla. It meant powerful in Thai. But the name became a promise to both of them. We survive this together. The sanctuary director, Chanida, had placed the trembling infant in Sarah's care with 6 words that changed everything. "She won't survive the night alone." That night stretched into 3 months of round-the-clock feeding, sleeping in the barn, and slowly discovering that healing someone else's trauma can resurrect your own will to live. Sarah named her Mahla. It meant powerful in Thai. But the name became a promise to both of them. We survive this together. The first time Sarah saw Mahla, the calf was lying on her side in the dirt, barely breathing. Her mother's body had been found 2 kilometers away, tusks hacked off, left to rot under a merciless sun. Rangers estimated the baby had been alone for nearly 48 hours. "Most don't make it past the first night," Chanida said quietly, kneeling beside the calf in the medical barn. "The trauma is too much. They give up." She looked at Sarah with an expression that carried both challenge and desperate hope. "But if someone stays with her constantly, talks to her, makes her feel safe, sometimes they remember how to fight." Sarah had felt something crack open inside her chest. This tiny creature, weighing barely 200 pounds, covered in cuts and caked mud, represented everything fragile in the world. Everything worth saving. Everything she'd failed to save 3 months ago when her brother took his last breath holding her hand. She volunteered immediately. The other workers set up a makeshift enclosure in the medical barn, bringing in hay, blankets, and formula. But as night fell and they returned to their quarters, Sarah remained. She pulled a sleeping bag beside Mahla's trembling body and began talking. She talked about Seattle, about her childhood dog named Copper, about her first day of veterinary school when she'd been so nervous she'd vomited in the parking lot. She talked about her brother Tom, about how he'd made her promise to keep living even when he couldn't. Anything to fill the silence with human presence, with life, with the promise that this baby elephant wasn't abandoned. Around 3 in the morning, Mahla's eyes opened. They were cloudy with fear and exhaustion, but they focused on Sarah's face with startling clarity. The calf's trunk, still clumsy and uncertain, reached out and touched Sarah's hand. Just a brief connection, barely a second, but it was enough. "I'm here," Sarah whispered, her own eyes burning with tears she'd been holding back for months. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." That became her mantra for the next 90 days. Through midnight feedings, when Mahla cried for a mother who would never come, through early morning walks when the calf's legs shook with weakness, through the gradual weight gain and the slow, miraculous return of playfulness. Sarah documented everything in a journal she kept by her sleeping bag. Mahla's first trumpet sound on day 12. The morning she discovered she could spray water with her trunk and soaked Sarah completely. The afternoon she finally approached the other elephants without trembling. But what Sarah didn't know was that on day 89, everything she'd built with Mahla would be tested in a way that would break them both. Se você já está torcendo pela Mahla e pela Sarah, deixa o like agora e se inscreve no canal. Essa história está apenas começando e eu prometo que cada segundo vai valer a pena. Ativa o sininho para não perder nenhuma história emocionante como essa. By month 2, Mahla refused to sleep unless Sarah was within sight. She would pace the enclosure, making distressed, rumbling sounds that echoed through the barn until Sarah appeared. Then she'd settle immediately, her trunk often draped across Sarah's lap as they both drifted off. Janida explained that elephants could form maternal bonds with humans, especially when orphaned young. "She thinks you're her mother," the director said one morning, watching Mahla follow Sarah across the compound like a devoted shadow. "To her, you are." The responsibility of that statement should have felt crushing. Instead, Sarah felt honored. This magnificent creature, capable of remembering across decades, of feeling grief and joy and loyalty as deeply as any human, had chosen her, trusted her, loved her. They developed rituals that became sacred. Every morning at 6, Sarah would bring Mahla's formula and they'd walk to the pond together. Mahla would wade into the shallow water while Sarah sat on the bank, both enjoying the cool morning air before the heat became oppressive. Sarah began teaching Mahla commands, not for performance, but for safety and communication. How to come when called, how to stop at the edge of restricted areas, how to be gentle with her trunk when greeting humans. Mahla absorbed everything with startling intelligence. "She's exceptional," Janida said one afternoon, watching Mahla solve a puzzle feeder in half the time it took older elephants. "Her trauma could have broken her. Instead, with your help, she's becoming stronger and smarter than most." Then, on week 7, Mahla stopped eating. For 3 days, she refused all food. Her trunk hung limp. Her eyes lost their brightness. Sarah stayed with her constantly, terrified, watching the calf waste away before her eyes. The sanctuary veterinarian ran blood tests, took x-rays, searched desperately for answers. "There's an infection," Dr. Somchai finally said, his face grave. "In her digestive system. Probably from contaminated water before she arrived here. It's advanced. We can try antibiotics, but Sarah..." He paused. "You need to prepare yourself. She might not respond." Sarah held Mahla's face in her hands that night, whispering promises and prayers in equal measure. "You don't get to give up," she said fiercely. "I didn't save you just to lose you now. We're survivors, remember? Both of us. You fight, and I'll fight with you." The antibiotics took 4 agonizing days to work, but on the morning of day 5, Mahla ate, just a little, then more. Within 2 weeks, she was back to her energetic, curious self. But the scare had cemented something between them that went beyond care or duty. It was family. Day 89 arrived with brutal finality. Sarah's visa extension had been denied. Her savings were depleted. Her life in Seattle was calling her back with increasing urgency. She had 3 days left at the sanctuary. The plan was simple. Sarah would slip away while Mahla was distracted during morning feeding with the herd. Clean break. No prolonged goodbye that might distress the elephant. Chanida had insisted this was best, though her eyes had revealed her own doubt. Sarah spent those final days preparing Mahla, spending extra time introducing her to other caretakers, encouraging bonds with the elephant herd. But Mahla always returned to Sarah. Always. On her last night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in the barn at midnight, watching Mahla rest peacefully, her ears twitching occasionally, her breathing steady and strong. The calf had grown so much, nearly tripling in size, her once fragile legs now sturdy and powerful. She would survive here. She would thrive. But how do you explain goodbye to someone who saved your life by letting you save theirs? Sarah's last morning arrived too quickly. She woke before dawn, her packed bags already waiting in the director's office, her heart already fracturing. The plan was in motion. Staff members were ready to distract Mahla during the morning routine. But as Sarah stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the elephant who'd given her a reason to feel again, she knew she couldn't just disappear. She moved closer, placing her hand gently on Mahla's side. The elephant's eyes opened immediately. That trunk, now so much longer and more controlled, wrapped carefully around Sarah's wrist. Not gripping, just holding, just connecting one last time. "I have to go," Sarah whispered, her voice shattering. "But you're going to be wonderful. You're going to grow big and strong, and you'll have the whole herd and Chanida and all the caretakers who love you, and you'll be so happy here. I promise." Mahla stood, and for several minutes, they simply existed together as the sun began painting the sky orange and pink. Sarah memorized everything. The rough texture of Mahla's skin under her palm, the earthy smell of hay and elephant, the rumbling sound Mahla made deep in her chest when content. When Chanida appeared at the barn door, time ran out. Sarah pressed her forehead against Mahla's trunk one final time. "Thank you," she breathed, "for saving me, for showing me how to live again. I will never, ever forget you." Walking away was the hardest thing she'd ever done, harder than her brother's funeral, harder than anything. Mahla called after her, a sound that pierced Sarah's chest like a blade. Every step felt wrong. But life was pulling her in a different direction, and she had to trust that some bonds don't break just because of distance. On the drive to the airport, Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Back in Seattle, she threw herself into rebuilding her career, joining a veterinary clinic specializing in rescue animals. She said yes to life again, all because a baby elephant had needed her to. But she thought about Mahla every single day for the next 3,650 days. Se essa parte já tocou seu coração, deixa like agora. Isso ajuda muito o canal e mostra para o YouTube que mais pessoas precisam conhecer histórias assim. E fica comigo, porque o que acontece a seguir vai deixar você sem palavras. A decade later, Sarah received an email that made her hands tremble. A wildlife documentary team needed a veterinarian consultant for a project in Thailand. 3 weeks, all expenses paid, and they'd specifically requested someone with elephant experience and a background in trauma recovery. The location line read Northern Thailand, Chiang Mai Province. Sarah stared at those words for 20 minutes. The documentary wasn't filming at Chanida's sanctuary, but they'd be less than 50 kilometers away, close enough to visit, close enough to find out if the past 10 years had been as long for Mahla as they'd been for her. She'd kept in touch with Chanida through occasional emails. She knew Mahla had integrated beautifully with the herd, that she'd grown into a healthy, powerful adult weighing nearly 4 tons, that she'd become a sanctuary favorite for her gentle nature and remarkable intelligence. But Chanida had also warned her in their last exchange. Elephants have extraordinary memories, but a decade is a lifetime. Don't expect recognition. Don't expect her to remember. It would be unfair to both of you to hope for that. Sarah had accepted the consultant position anyway. She told herself she'd be professional. This was about the documentary work, nothing more. If she happened to visit the sanctuary as a tourist, it would just be to see Mahla thriving. That would be enough closure. It had to be enough. The documentary wrapped 2 days early due to unexpected permit approvals, giving Sarah a free afternoon. She rented a car before she could talk herself out of it and drove to the sanctuary, her heart pounding harder with each kilometer. She hadn't told Chanida she was coming. She wasn't even sure this was healthy. But she needed to see Mahla one more time, even if the elephant looked at her like a stranger, even if it broke her heart all over again. The sanctuary had transformed, new enclosures, more elephants, a proper visitor center with educational displays. Sarah paid for the general walking tour, joining a group of about 50 tourists being led through the grounds by an enthusiastic young guide who couldn't have been more than 20. They'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes, the guide explaining the sanctuary's anti-poaching initiatives when she pointed toward a group of elephants bathing near a large pond. "That's our middle herd," she explained. 7 females, ranging from 8 to 35 years old. The 1/3 from the left is Mahla. She's been with us for over 10 years and is one of our most social elephants. Sarah's vision tunneled. There, larger than she'd imagined, majestic and powerful, her tusks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Even from 50 yards away, even after a decade of growth and change, Sarah knew. That was her Mahla. As if feeling the weight of Sarah's gaze, the elephant stopped bathing. Her massive head turned with deliberate slowness. And those amber eyes, a decade older but unmistakable, locked directly onto Sarah's face across the distance. Everything stopped. 10 years collapsed into nothing. Mahla's trunk lifted high into the air, and she released a trumpet call that echoed across the entire sanctuary grounds. It was a sound Sarah had only heard once before, on the morning Mahla had recovered from her infection and called out in pure joy. The other elephants in the pond scattered, confused by her sudden intensity. The tour guide started shouting warnings about maintaining safe distance. Tourists began backing away quickly, cameras still recording but fear evident on their faces. But Mahla wasn't being aggressive. Sarah knew elephant body language well enough to recognize this immediately. The flapping ears, the rumbling vocalizations, the purposeful but controlled approach. This wasn't threat. This was emotion beyond measure. Sarah stood frozen as the massive elephant crossed the distance between them. 40 feet, 30, 20. The guide was still yelling. Someone grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her back to safety. She shook them off gently, her eyes never leaving Mahla's. "It's okay," she said, her voice somehow steady, despite her entire body shaking. "She knows me." 15 feet away, Mahla stopped, her trunk extended, moving through the air with delicate precision, sampling Sarah's scent. The elephant's eyes never left Sarah's face. Recognition flashed there, unmistakable and profound and devastating in its clarity. Then Mahla made a sound Sarah had only heard once before, in a barn on a midnight a decade ago, when a traumatized calf had finally decided to trust. It was a rumble, deep and complex, that seemed to vibrate in the space between grief and reunion, between loss and finding, between 10 years of separation and this impossible moment. Remember you, miss you, love you. Sarah's vision blurred. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Look at you. Look at how magnificent you became." Mahla's trunk wrapped around Sarah's shoulders with exquisite gentleness, pulling her close with a care that acknowledged both her size and Sarah's fragility. The elephant's forehead pressed against Sarah's chest, right over her heart. They stood like that while 50 tourists recorded in stunned silence. Chanida appeared running from the main building, alerted by staff about the unusual interaction. She stopped short when she saw them, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible," she breathed. 10 years. Elephants remember, but I've never seen recognition this strong after so long. But Sarah wasn't listening. She had her hands on Mahla's face, looking into those wise, amber eyes that held a decade of separation and every moment of their 3 months together. "I never forgot you either," she said through tears. "Not for a single day. You saved me. Do you understand? You gave me back my life when I wanted to throw it away." Mahla rumbled again, a sound that vibrated through Sarah's entire body, through her bones, through her soul. The elephant's trunk explored Sarah's face, her hair, her hands, as if confirming that she was solid, present, truly there after 3,650 days of absence. "Agora quero ouvir você. Comente aqui embaixo. Você acredita que o amor entre humanos e animais pode sobreviver a qualquer distância ou tempo? Tem alguma história pessoal de conexão profunda com um animal? Vou ler todos os comentários e responder o máximo que conseguir. E se ainda não se inscreveu, faz isso agora, porque tem muitas histórias emocionantes chegando neste canal. Sarah extended her consulting contract and spent the next month at the sanctuary, working alongside Chanida and reconnecting with Mahla. The elephant stayed close whenever Sarah was present, often resting her trunk on Sarah's shoulder while they walked the grounds together. It was as if no time had passed at all. When it came time to leave again, the goodbye was different. Sarah had negotiated with her clinic in Seattle to split her year between both locations, dedicating 6 months annually to the sanctuary's veterinary needs. Mahla seemed to sense this wasn't a permanent farewell, remaining calm as Sarah prepared to depart, her wise eyes holding trust instead of fear. Some bonds transcend time and distance. Some connections run deeper than logic can explain. Sarah learned that love doesn't diminish with separation, and that the hearts capable of the deepest memory often belong to the most magnificent creatures. Mahla had remembered, and in that recognition, both elephant and human found their way home to each other again. That was beyond words. That was beyond everything. That was proof that some promises once made echo across decades and continents and species. We survive this together, always.